And joining us now to sort all of this out, NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, Politico White House correspondent Eugene Daniels, Republican strategist Susan Del Percio, and former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade. So, Vaughn, you've been covering this so closely. Talk to us about what we know the former president's lawyers have been told. His response, I read your notes last night, it was a very lengthy, very Trumpian response.
That's accurate.
A lot of outrage in that.
Right.
And the fact is, we don't really know what's going on because it's up to a grand jury, but legal experts will talk to Barbara would tell you that this could be the final stages.
Right, and we have some crumbs dating back to Mark Pomerantz, the prosecutor who left a year ago, making the case of what evidence they already did have in DA Bragg's office that may be used to bring a potential indictment against Donald Trump. But there's a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. Now, Donald Trump has continued to deny that he ever had sex with Stormy Daniels. He has acknowledged a $130,000 payment from him to Michael Cohen, but he said it was a private contract. He said it was not an illegal campaign contribution here. And if he were to testify, he would have to be told that he was a potential defendant. And at this point, that is still outstanding is the extent to which DA Bragg's office has made clear to him whether he is the center of this investigation.
And given his track record with the Letitia James civil case, the state attorney general, where he took the Fifth Amendment, how many times? I don't know. That was his right. But in a criminal case, it would be potentially far more serious.
Right. And it would be surprising in a criminal case if he did not. And this is very separate from that civil litigation that Letitia James brought. But there were a series of questions that she put forward about his family business there at the time. And he pled the Fifth every single step of the way. So it'd be surprising for him to go in front of a grand jury and testify, knowing that that could be used against him, not only to indict him, but in criminal proceedings.
So now to Barbara McQuade, if you could give us your professor's primer on what this all means in terms of the potential of a criminal indictment.
I think that we can draw some educated conclusions about what is happening here. If the reporting is true, that Donald Trump has been invited to testify before the grand jury, I think we can conclude two things. One is that Alvin Bragg has reached the end of his investigation. Typically, if you're going to invite the target of a grand jury in to testify, it is after you have talked to all of the other witnesses, reviewed all of the documents, and are as informed as you can be. And this is an invitation, not a compulsion to come. So it's really that person's opportunity to explain, is there another side to this story that we ought to know? Is there something we're missing here? So that says we're at the end. I think the other thing that this tells us is that charges are very likely. And that's because if they were simply going to decline to bring charges after having interviewed all of these witnesses and reviewed all of these documents, there would be no need to invite Donald Trump to come in and share his side of the story. It's a tremendous undertaking to invite a former president to come in and testify before a grand jury. It is not a step anyone would take lightly. And so that says to me that not only are they at the end, but the charges are very likely to be filed.
And Barbara, just to follow up, we understand that Michael Cohen, who, of course, was one of his chief accusers and served time for this, more than a year, in fact, is meeting with prosecutors again and will likely be talking to the grand jury for the 20th time on this case next week. What does that tell you?
Well, 20 times to meet with prosecutors or testify is really a lot. It is unheard of. But I will also add that if I were prosecuting a case where Michael Cohen was a key witness, I would want to make sure I pushed him on every possible detail, because you need to not only ensure that you believe him, but that a jury will believe him when he testifies. And so what you would want to do is find ways to test the veracity of what he's saying and to corroborate it with objective evidence. You find other witnesses who can repeat what he had to say from their own perspective, or find documents, phone records, bank records, checks, other things that confirm what he is saying, so that even if a jury remains skeptical of someone who is, after all, a convicted perjurer, they can still find guilt in this case without necessarily pinning everything on the believability of Michael Cohen.
Now, Eugene, we know that the former president went on social media slamming Alvin Bragg and denying any wrongdoing. So what do you expect more from him today.
Just more of that, right?
Of that.
We've seen this from Donald Trump for years. It's not going to change the way that he operates. He kind of went through the very Trumpian way that he does, bouncing around and talking about these things and released it again in a full statement. And I think, like, this is a former president and a candidate for president who is going to use this to his advantage, right? He has spent years denigrating institutions just like the folks that are investigating him now. So he believes, and the folks that I talk to that or talk to him believe, that this is going to be good for him in this campaign, that it is going to be good for him in this primary, because what he said is, first of all, they're going to come after me because they want to come after you. And that is the message, and that's going to continue to be the message. And all of that grievance politics is going nowhere, and it's going to stick in. And honestly, because of all the work that he's done to denigrate these institutions, it's going to be interesting to see how politically, whether or not there's any kind of backlash, right? There are going to be possibly a lot of candidates who are going to be on stage with him at these debates. Do they use these opportunities to talk about all of the drama and the legal issues that he has and that would make him a bad candidate in the general election?
Now, Susan Del Percio, let's talk about that and whether it actually redounds to his favor among Republican primary voters.
Yeah, I'm not sure it is a benefit to him to be indicted for the Republican primary, although it makes sense that they feel that they could still pull through it. However, what I think the numbers that Trump and his team are going to be watching are the head-to-head matchups with Biden for the general election. That's what he's afraid of. He's afraid of having big numbers come out of him losing to Biden, which could actually lead him to even potentially withdraw his candidacy because he does not want to lose again.
And Vaughn, you know Iowa better than any of us, having been living there for a while during past races. So in Iowa, we know that DeSantis is there today, was already speaking this morning, and Trump is going to be there on Monday. So there's a pretty good comparison. And where are they head to head in that new poll that just came out from Seltzer?
If I may say first, I've lived in Iowa a great deal since the first ever trip I took to Iowa, in which you dragged me along.
I did.
With Doug Adams, and then we never seemed to be able to leave. But on that very trip that I went with you years ago, what Iowa, these early stages, does tell you is where at least some of the heart and souls of the greater population are. There are some tea leaves, some indicators, whether folks are actually getting tired of Donald Trump, whether folks are open to a Ron DeSantis. Of course, there is a long process ahead here. But when you see some of these new numbers out of the Des Moines Register poll, that came out here just this morning, when you look at the favorabilities of Donald Trump and these other candidates, Donald Trump has taken a hit over the last year here, going down to 80%. But when you stack them up compared to the other candidates, you continue to see him outperforming. Now, like Nikki Haley, for instance, there's still about 20% that say they are unsure about her. So that is what part of the Iowa experience will provide her. At the same time, I was in Iowa 3 weeks ago with Mike Pence, and at his own event in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, I was asking folks what they thought. And one individual after the next was telling me that Donald Trump was still on their minds. One woman even said Donald Trump was her guy through and through. She liked Mike Pence and came to hear him speak, but Donald Trump was still her guy. And I think that is what really, if you were Donald Trump, you were feeling good about at these early stages going into this.
And better numbers in New Hampshire by far over DeSantis as well.
Right, and he's got some, you're talking about inroads. You're talking about a population here that has been long familiar with Donald Trump. If you're looking even at the youth vote, for instance, which right now some early numbers are suggesting he's actually performing quite well. Who has been the Republican Party over the last 8 years? We are talking about Donald Trump. And so this new generation of voters that didn't caucus or even take part in the New Hampshire primary back in 2015, 2016, they are a part of the process this time around. And being able to strengthen some of those numbers is key for him. And when you're talking about older voters, that's why you're hearing him talk about Medicare and Social Security. These are key demographics. If he can build that support now, that can help him when you're talking about indictments potentially coming down the line.
Well, as you're still the best person on Iowa.
I'm going to bring you out there the next stop with me, then.
Eugene and Vaughn, thank you so much. And Susan, and of course, our friend Barbara McQuade. Thanks to all.